The Knights Templar are by far the most famous Christian military organization to ever exist. They were famed for their bravery and zeal during the various crusades in the Middle East, all of which, despite the Templars' best efforts, failed. In modern times, however, the ethics of the crusades are in question, and thus the modern view of the Templars is soured compared to what they used to be remembered as. The Templar Knights have been further villainized through media such as movies and video games. And while there's a lot of debate online about if the Crusades were justifiably or morally correct, it doesn't matter because that's not the topic of this video. In this video, I wish to zoom in on the Knights themselves and attempt to analyze their history, beliefs, and the nature of the mysterious order, as well as their eventual demise. So it's only right that we start this analysis with the base question: who were the Knights Templar? Well, to begin with, like most organized Christian military orders, they were of Catholic faith, and went by many names such as the Knights Templar, the Order of Solomon's Temple, the Order of Christ, and by far the most interesting one, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. The last name I just mentioned holds a lot of value as to who the individual knight was: a poor man. In the conditions for joining the order, knights were required to swear into poverty, meaning simply that they would not be paid for their work and would not receive any money that the order makes. And trust me, the order made a lot of money. Due to the order's propagation of Western Christianity and their vital role in the Crusades, as well as protecting Christian pilgrims, they were famed throughout civilized Europe. And due to this goodwill, the Templars were exempted from taxes by the Pope himself. This allowed the order to continue to make millions through the trade of grain, wine, political prisoners, and yes, slaves. It was from this that the order became rich, while the individual knights stayed dirt poor. At the order's peak, it housed about 2,000 knights, while having about 20,000 members in total, meaning that only 10% of the order were actually knights, all of which had to be knighted beforehand. This explains why there was no knighting ceremonies in the order. The other 90% were involved with the order's finance. It was these members that ensured the order's financial success. Success that would allow them to operate as a sort of international bank across the Christendom of Europe, building a network of financial infrastructure as well as military fortifications throughout Europe. This network of economic infrastructure and quote-unquote banking made them one of the first ever multinational corporations in the world. They became so wealthy that paying off the ransom of Louis IX, the French king at the time, was the equivalent of losing some pocket change. Little did the Templars know, however, Louis IX's grandson, Philip IV, would bring about their eventual downfall. What brought about the downfall of the Templar Knights was a product of their failures and successes. Their failures in keeping a foothold in the Holy Land slowly began to fade their support from Europe, while their expansive economic network throughout Europe made them an entity powerful enough to challenge the European monarchies of the time. On top of that, they were kept on a very thin leash by the Pope. This scared French King Philip IV, who owed the order a handsome sum of money, and thus the king, jealous of the order's power and with no intention to pay his debt, began orchestrating the downfall of the Templars. In about 1307, rumors began to spread from the mouths of ousted Templars about various criminal activities that the order was committing. These rumors were discussed by Templar Grand Master de Molay, Pope Clement V, and King Philip, as well as his ministers. The conclusion was that the rumors were false. However, King Philip was eager to use this gossip for his own devices. Soon, Philip began putting pressure on Clement to take action against the order. Pope Clement V, whose election into the papacy was ensured by Philip, had little choice but to obey the French king, as defiance would certainly lead to conflict, as it had between many French kings and popes of the time. Thus, on Friday the 13th of October 1307, a day that some argue began the infamy of Friday the 13th, King Philip ordered the rest of Desmoulins, and about 600 other Templars throughout France. The order was charged with various crimes, such as spitting on the cross, denying Jesus, homosexual practices, idol worship, and financial fraud, to name a few. And confessions to these charges were made by some Templars. However, these confessions were made under heavy torture and duress. Thus, in modern times, we cannot see them as valid. To add to that, many of the Templars who made confessions retracted them later. Out of all the charges that the Templars were charged with, the charge of idol worshipping struck me the most. How could an order centered around Christianity be accused of idol worship? Well, King Philip accused them of worshipping a pagan entity known as Baphomet. Baphomet, as we know today, is a figure with a goat-like head with the body of a man and widely known for its use in modern Satanism. However, almost nothing was known about Baphomet in 1307, and that's because it had only just been created. Let me explain. The earliest recorded use of the word Baphomet was written in a letter by Anselm of Ribemont, a major figure during the First Crusade, and the letter was a report about the siege of Agnac. In the letter, Ribemont states that the Turks called loudly on Baphomet. Historians today agree that the Baphomet that Ribemont was referring to was Muhammad, the founder of Islam. This is because Mahomet is an alternative name for Muhammad, and Baphomeria was also a name given to mosques at the time. Thus, combining the two words gives you Baphomet. This means that Baphomet was most likely a name used by early crusaders to refer to the prophets of Islam. This would change, however, as King Philip would use the reference of the word in those early crusader letters to accuse the order of worshipping some pagan god by the name of Baphomet. From this we can conclude that the inventor of the Baphomet we know today was actually King Philip IV of France, and was later popularized by French occultist Stanislas de Guattari. The knights were also accused of worshipping a mummified head that they recovered in the Holy Land. It is believed today that the prosecutors at the time believed the head to be the mummified head of John the Baptist that was decapitated by King Herod Antipas centuries prior. This basically wraps up the idol worshipping charges. Charges that under a modern lens can be seen as most probably invalid and falsely constructed to bring down the order. The other charges like spitting on the cross, denying Jesus, and homosexual practices have little evidence to them other than a few forced confessions here and there. The most probable valid charge was the financial fraud. Seeing as the Templars had a vast financial network that spanned throughout Europe, it is not illogical to suspect possible fraud slipping through the cracks. Whether the charges were true or false did not change the Templars' eventual fate. After once again caving to King Philip IV, Pope Clement issued a papal bull on the 22nd of November 1307 that instructed all of Europe's Christendom to arrest the Templars in their respective regions and seize their assets. The Templars were tortured relentlessly for confessions by the notorious Inquisition. The majority of the Templars eventually yielded confessions. However, after being released from the custody of the Inquisition, almost all of them retracted their confessions and pled innocence. Even the Grand Master Desmoulins retracted his confession that he made under torture. The papal bull also called for a trial to decide on the Templars' guiltiness. In the trial, some Templars who had legal experience tried to defend themselves using the retraction of their confessions as a means to prove their innocence. However, Philip, through the placement of allies to lead the investigation, managed to block these attempts and used the previous forced confessions to have scores of Templars burned at the stake. Philip, through the use of military intimidation, would further threaten Clement to disband the order. Clement, as before, caved to Philip's demands, and thus, at the Council of Vienna in 1312, Clement issued multiple papal bulls, one of them being Vox in Excelso. This papal bull officially disbanded the Templar Knights. thus putting an end to Christ's 193-year-old order. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, and other key figures in the order were found guilty and were sent to be burnt at the stake in Paris on the 18th of March 1314. At the execution, de Molay, who had remained defiant to the end, requested to face the Notre Dame Cathedral. The Grand Master's final words were shouts from the flames, proclaiming that soon both Clement and King Philip would meet him again before God, stating that, and I quote, "God knows who is wrong and has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death." And just as the Grand Master stated, calamity did soon occur to both Clement and Philip. Clement V would pass away only a month after de Molay's execution. His exact cause of death is unknown. However, when his body was laid in state at the church, a thunderstorm occurred, and lightning struck the church, burning it, engulfing Clement's body in flames, just as he engulfed de Molay's body in flames. And as for King Philip, he would die later that same year in a hunting accident. This ghostly occurrence have led many to believe that Jacques de Molay placed a curse on both King Philip IV and Pope Clement V in his final moments, a curse that would indeed bring reckoning to its victims. With the execution of its leaders complete, the nearly 200-year-old order faded away, its assets handed over to the Knights Hospitaller as per the instructions of the papal bull. And any remaining Templar Knights either joined other Christian orders or retired altogether. And it is at this that the end of the and that is the end for the Knights Templar, an organization among the richest in the world, with the poorest members, and an organization that, through its economic influence, rivaled nations, monarchies, and even the papacy. An organization that would be targeted for its success and would see its end at the hand of the jealous, the greedy, and the corrupt.